Today I'm going to talk to you about tools. And not just any kind of tools, but tools for Vapi. I'm going to explain you exactly what tools are, how they work, how you can leverage them for your business, what they previously were, because that's always a very often asked question, and on how this whole setup looks like directly on the screen. And not only that, I'm also going to give you a template that you can use directly inside of make.com so that you can literally recreate the setup I'm going to show you here for a temporary tool call so that you can get a better understanding of what happens behind the scenes and how you can set it up in the most easy way for your very own business. Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I have often talked about functions, which is what previously was available inside of Vapi for making the now called tool calls. And a tool call is nothing else than you giving the LLM the functionality of accessing external data through a function or tool call. So while that sounds weird, it probably makes more sense if I'm going to show you a practical example, which is right here on the screen. We are inside of our Vapi dashboard, and in the Vapi dashboard I have an assistant that says you're an assistant that helps the user with their weather inquiries. So if you have been working with Vapi before, you know how the voice agents work, right? You have a first message, which is the first one that is said on the phone or wherever you have that assistant implemented. And you have the system prompt, which is basically the brain of the instructions, whatever the assistant should do, how it should interact, how it should answer, etc. So this, what you see on the screen, is a very, very basic example that literally has only one sole purpose, which is giving us back the weather, right? So by default, the AI would obviously not know the current weather because we would have no live data. It can only work with a prompt that you add to this master instructions. And that is where the function calls come handy, because there are APIs, which in my case, I'm using the weather API, which is a freemium version of a API that you can use to get weather data for a city, a country, however that looks like. You literally just feed in some information and you get out an answer with the weather based on that location that you ask it for. Now, while that is a separate service hosted somewhere in the internet, the AI itself cannot access it by default. So we basically use functions to allow the AI to talk to that endpoint of the weather API so that it can fetch information and can send it back to us. So in the end, we basically gave the tool or the possibility of calling an external URL and requesting information from that and feeding it back into the AI, the LLM or the voice assistant, to make it smarter, to get accurate data about something that we would like it to do, so that we can use it inside of the conversation to make the conversation more smooth, more enriched. We can add information and just make this whole experience of calling to it a lot more interesting. Now, Vapi has changed a lot over the past couple of months. Obviously, it is a very, very new company as well. A lot of things happen and change, and so do a lot of the features. And that's why you previously have seen on my channel something called functions, which was the precursor of what currently is called tools inside of Vapi. So functions have been initially integrated right in here in the Vapi assistant under the functions tab. And you could basically create your own very own functions here, which you can see here on the screen down in this box, custom functions. This was the previous setup that you would use to make a custom function for an assistant that you can then use to let the AI communicate to an external service. Now, by just hovering over it, you can see that this feature is deprecated, meaning you cannot really use it anymore because Vapi changed something in the structure and now they moved everything towards tool calls. And if you've seen it before, a function call is literally, it has exactly the same purpose like a tool call, just that the structure changed, meaning that the way you set it up is a little bit different and the way how you connect it is a little bit different, because now a function is literally added as in a separate box or a separate window or a separate tab inside of the Vapi dashboard, and it is then connected from there to the assistant. This has a couple of benefits, but also a couple of difficulties. The benefits are obviously that you can reuse tool calls in multiple assistants, so you don't need to recreate them over and over again. All you would do is you would head to tool call, you create yours, and you connect it here in the tool section, which I already have on here. It's called Get Current Weather, and that's where we dive in, because this is the example I'm going to use. The example you'll see today will be me having a conversation with an assistant that can get the current weather from whatever kind of city I tell it to and retrieve it to us. It's mentioned it so that we can basically use it in the conversation to make the conversation actually work. Now, before diving into the configuration, I'm going to show you an actual example. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'll head over to the assistant right here. I will click on Talk with Assistant so we can have a chat with it. And I will also show you here this make.com scenario. This is basically the one that you get completely for free directly from within my resource hub. So simply head over to hub.integraticus.com, grab yourself a copy of that, and you can follow me along on the screen to understand what actually happens behind the scenes. So for making this whole setup work, you need two things. Number one is obviously a Vapi account. Number two is a make.com account. because we're going to leverage make.com for making the function call with this template. And this template is optimized in a special way so that you can reuse it for multiple functions, which I prefer a lot. And I'm also going to tell you why I actually use something like a webhook module and not the predefined integration of Vapi within make.com, but we come to that later, why I'm doing this in the first place. Now let's head to an actual example. So I'm going to open my Vapi dashboard and I'm going to talk with the assistant right here. And we're just going to ask it a couple of things about the weather in certain cities.
Hello, this is Ava. How may I assist you today?
Hey Ava, can you please tell me the weather in London?
Just a sec. The current weather in London is misty with a temperature of 19.3 degrees C. If you have any other questions or need further assistance, feel free to ask.
That's awesome. Can you please also tell me the weather in Sydney?
Give me a moment. The current weather in Sydney is clear with a temperature of 24.1 degrees Celsius. If you need any further assistance...
That's really cool. Can you lastly tell me the weather in Cape Town?
Give me a moment. Here you go. The current weather in Cape Town is partly cloudy with a temperature of 16.1 degrees Celsius. If you need any more information...
Thank you, that's it. So as you can see, it gives me the weather, and I assume it's probably accurate because it comes from Weather API, which should be certainly accurate. But you can see that it actually gives me information about the weather while I have not defined anything of that inside of the system prompt. All it has access to is this sentence right here, the first message, and it has access to a function called getCurrentWeather. Now, based on all of this, we managed to get the current weather out, and now it's time for me to give you first an explanation on how it works, and I'm also telling you exactly why I set it up in the way I set it up, so that you can easily understand why I did it, which again hopefully helps you in your business, in your agency, for whatever you do with those voice agents, to build the best possible solution for yourself. Now, obviously, the first thing you need is an assistant. So I will just share with you the first message and system prompt inside of my resource hub as well, so you can simply copy it. I'm just using a standard configuration, nothing special, GPT-4o cluster as the LLM version or the model, and nothing else. I have literally not changed anything except of in the advanced tab, I have added a webhook URL right here, which is what we're going to do if you actually want to connect the function. But we're coming to that now. Now, the first thing you need to do after you have the assistant, which can be literally just with those two first messages and the system prompt, you head over to the tools section right over here and we create a function. Now you can already see I have two things here, tool name and tool description. So I'm just going to copy them for simplicity reasons. But what you would do is you would click on new tool, and right here you get the possibility of selecting a couple of values, including a server URL for the custom tool section, which is what we are going to use. Now, before I actually dive into this server URL setup, because we are going to use custom tools, you might be asking yourself, Yannis, you're using make.com. Why don't you just use the make.com setup right here? I could do the exact same thing, but there is a difference because I like to be flexible and I like to be able to control the data that we are transmitting or sending between each other, between Vapi and make.com. I'd like to control that on a more granular level. Now, for beginners, it is awesome that there's a make.com integration because for them it is very, very easy to structure a scenario using the predefined Vapi modules and integrations. For a moment, let's assume you actually want to use the make.com integration. You can do the same thing by literally just clicking on make here, and in the server URL, what you would do is you would go to your scenario, which would be the one that you would use for function callbacks. You would right click here, add a module, and from the module you can find in the integrations, if not here, you search for Vapi, the Vapi integration itself, and you have a couple of endpoints available as you can see here. And there's something like watch function call request, you literally select that, and right in here you select your Vapi endpoint, right? And this gives you a webhook URL that you can copy, and then you would just paste this webhook URL into your server URL and continue. This would be one way of doing it. You can then use even the Vapi integration to send back the responses with another module right here, respond to a function call, and you can send the information back. Now, while this is awesome, I am not the biggest fan of using those custom integrations, especially since I've been working in the automation industry for like 6-7 years. I realized that it's better to just keep it as general as possible, meaning you want to follow the web standards for HTTP requests instead of following a custom notation for an integration. I mainly do this for flexibility reasons because I just want to be as flexible as possible of changing things in case something breaks or goes wrong, because the more things or more companies you involve in a setup, the more complex that whole thing gets and the more likely it is as well for it to break. So obviously Vapi itself is an orchestration layer, so there's tons of stuff going into it. which also means that Vapi is not in full control if it comes to voice providers breaking, to transcribers breaking. All of those things can happen. Now, while this is something that you cannot really influence, except of you choosing a voice provider where you know they have a really good uptime or a really good SLA to make sure the stuff runs out of the box, in most cases you don't. So we try to keep other parts as optimized and as simple as possible. Now, the reason why I don't use the Vapi integration in the end is because Vapi itself creates its own structure for it, which might be optimized for Vapi. But imagine now you, for example, won't use make.com anymore and you switch to a different provider, or you maybe even create your very own workflow automation software using N8N or Flowwise, whatever else. There are tons of them out there, right? And you want to switch to something else. If you're using the Vapi integration, you don't know exactly how they validate information because they can do that by themselves in the module. And this is often a bit more tricky because they pre-validate stuff for you, which makes it easy to set up. But if you want to switch somewhere else or you want to change something, it is more of a pain because you don't have full control over the data that is flowing. And this is the reason I'm using the standard HTTP modules usually, or webhook modules, to get the information so I can see exactly what happens behind the scenes. Now, while this thing for now works nearly in the same way, I just don't take the risk. I literally just use the standard modules of make.com because in the end I can switch it to whatever provider I want to if I need to. Or let's say you're an agency, you have a client, they work with Zapier, for example, or any kind of other platform, Integrately, Power Automate, etc. You want to be able to just switch it over there instead of just relying on predefined integrations where you first need to figure out how they validate things and then rebuild it in a different setup. Okay, that's a lot of theoretical information, but now I hope you really understand why I'm using the custom setup and not make.com itself. And it's going to be very similar anyways, and you will see it now. For make.com, you would have added a server URL. For custom tools, we do the exact same thing, just that we use a different module inside of make.com. And by the way, you don't need to use make.com for it either. You can use any kind of platform, it works anywhere. But the examples I show is with make.com because I just like it the most. All right, enough with theory. Let's head over and actually try this. So what we're going to do is, or what you do is, you literally just download the scenario from within the resource hub. You go down here to the three dots, you click on import blueprint, you upload the file that you can download over there, and you will see this exact setup. Now for you as a configuration, all you would need to do is you head first over here to the webhook section, you add a webhook of your choice, you copy that address to the clipboard, click OK. Then you head back into your Vapi dashboard to the tool that you're currently creating. We're gonna add here in the server URL that webhook endpoint that we just added. You don't need to worry now about a secret token. You can add it in make.com. It's a bit harder to edit or to manipulate headers. So you can simply keep it empty for now. You can maybe even add a security parameter at the end if you want. So using query parameters, so you can have something like SEC, and then you have some secret value that you can validate against it inside of the make.com scenario. But for now, I'm just gonna leave it. I'm gonna click save, which then creates a new tool for me. Now you can see that the changes have been saved. All I'm doing now is I click here on next, and now I can build the schema. So this is not the function definition, which is very important to mention because it might be confusing because you obviously need to define the function and you need to define parameters. And to make it more visual of what the difference is between the function and the parameter, imagine, for example, you go to a restaurant, you get a menu, and every menu has different kind of menu items, right? So the menu would be the function, the menu items would be the parameters. So you have one definition for the whole thing called menu, and then you have single items that are inside of the menu with more precise information. Now, the property name, or what you would usually like to retrieve. So in our case, we are going to keep it very plain and simple. We're literally just going to call this thing query. And the reason we call it query is because Weather API, which by the way, here is the Swagger documentation for that, has an endpoint called current JSON, and it accepts a Q, which stands for query, because that is basically what we pass in to this endpoint, just so we have a better relation between the actual data we want to fetch and the information we feed in. So it's easier for the AI to actually feed in the proper details. So we're gonna call that query, which later on will tell the AI, okay, this is the query of whatever we want to search for. So now as the definition, we can write something like the city or location we want to get the weather for. So this is literally just a description that later on is used by the AI to reason when to use this tool call. And as we say here, the city or location, or we can maybe even just call it country, we want to get the weather for. So this is a lot more precise, meaning that if someone asks in the conversation, tell me the weather about London, it has a better relation, or it's more likely that the AI reasons that, okay, the user wants something, and there's a tool call available that basically allows me or it has a parameter that allows me to get the city or the country from the conversation and make a tool call to weather API to check a weather. I might most likely use it. So this is basically the definition of the item or parameter in this case, and we only need one. So after you leave it here, string is totally fine. You simply click on save, it is added here, and this is the whole schema we need for the setup. Let's say, for example, you have a different function call where you would like to collect more information, let's say the username, the language, or whatever it is. You can define that inside of the properties, because that is basically what we are going to send over to the function in the end to make the tool call. Now, with the query set, all we do is we click down here on next, and this is now the menu that we are going to define. So basically the function or the tool itself, and the name itself is very important. As you can see here, it is usually very descriptive of what that function does or that tool does. Here we have get user info, get user email, lookup address. This is all examples. And obviously, since we want to retrieve the weather, we are going to call it get current weather. Now for the description, this is the most important part, because that is in the end the most high impact field that we use for reasoning when we actually want to use the tool call, because that is the one that the AI uses to understand if to make a request or not, or if just ignore it. Now I added this part here, which is what I had in my default tool also, which is called get the current weather for a given city or country. Very descriptive. It basically just tells the AI, okay, the user wants to know the weather in a city or in a country. I have to use this get current weather function to check the current weather inside of that city or country. Now you can be more descriptive. I would try to keep it as short and as precise as possible. So don't overbloat this. It is really important, because otherwise the LLM might call it or might not call it in certain circumstances where you would like to have it called. So giving it the flexibility of still reasoning well, it makes sense to just keep it short, precise, and on the point. Now, it is also important to mention that it also, like the quality of the output also depends on the LLM model that you use inside of your voice assistant. So if you run on something like GPT 4o mini, you will have worse results than on 4o itself, because 4o mini, for some reason, is not as accurate and as good for function calling or tool calling than 4o is. So this obviously also depends on the LLMs you use, and that is a very, very crucial point as well. By the way, not every single LLM supports function calling, so you need to see if that LLM that you would like to integrate with Vapi supports function calling in the first place. But I can tell you for sure that OpenAI does. Some others didn't. I remember Grok, for example, wasn't capable back then. I don't think it is capable right now. We're not using it. So that is something you need to just research by yourself. Now, once we have added that, all we do, we click here on create, which then creates that function, as you can see here. So now we basically have twice the exact same function. So what I'm going to do is I'll just delete one of them, because in the end we only need one, right? So you will have that exact same setup, which looks like this. And now we're coming to the next part, which is actually connecting the tool, first of all, with your assistant, which you can do very, very easily by heading over to the assistants. You head over to the functions and you select the tool here in this section of the get current of this dropdown. You can just click into it and you select this get current weather function that you just created. Now there's another thing I would like to mention about the advanced tab, because you can also define a server URL right here. And within here you have server messages, and in the server messages you can also define the function call, which basically then would send the information of that function call as well to this URL right here. Now, this doesn't need to match with your tool call, but if you have it in the tool call anyways, you don't need to select the function call here, even though you can. I just wanted to mention that because there are multiple ways on where you can add the functions or the information of the function that is going to be retrieved. But best case, obviously, since you have it in the tools, you just leave it in the tools and you can ignore things like that here in the advanced section. I just wanted to mention that. Now, once you have the function connected right here in the tool section, we are now ready to actually configure the make.com scenario. And the only thing that is missing is you adding the weather API key that you can get from weatherapi.com, which looks something like this. So once you're inside of the weatherapi.com page, you will find an API key right here, which you can then copy and simply paste inside of the make.com scenario in the HTTP module right here. You can simply open it and go down here to the your API key section, and you replace this part with the actual API key from your weather API. Once you've done that, you click OK and you are ready to test this whole scenario out. Now, just make sure that you name it the exact same way like I did in the scenario, because you would need to adjust one thing otherwise. if you, for example, rename the function to get weather instead of get current weather, you would need to head into this filter right here, and you would need to adjust get current weather to the actual naming of the function that you defined inside of the tool call right here. So if we head to tool call, get current weather, this one basically needs to match this filter right here. If it doesn't, it will not go through. But anyways, you're going to test it, and the way you test it, very easy. You click on run once, and once it runs, we can simply call it and have a conversation, and you will then see the actual information that is being sent. I'm gonna head over to the assistant, gonna click talk with assistant, and gonna start the call.
Hello, this is Ava. How may I assist you today?
Hey Ava, can you please tell me the weather in London?
This'll just take a sec. The current weather in London is foggy with a temperature of 17.1 degrees.
Okay, as you can see, that worked out well. We basically got the information in here, which is the function call result or response of the tool call that we made within Vapi. Then you can see it matches the filter. This filter checks if it's a function call. Awesome, it is. Then we have another one where it basically checks which function we are calling, which is something I built in for you. So later on, let's say you add multiple function calls, you can use that exact same template for those function calls as well by simply clicking here once on the router. It adds a new field. You can kind of copy whatever you need and just set up another filter here that basically filters the same way against the function name here. So you just add this and say add another function, whatever that function looks like, right? And then it will basically execute on this pathway when this other function calls. The only thing that you need is then this module, which I'm just going to clone. I'm going to add here, because this is the response of the tool call, and this is the information in the result that you're going to send back. But I'm going to explain you that in a second. Now, the next module right here is the HTTP module. So those two modules are basically responsible right now for fetching the weather and validating the weather information. Because obviously we first need to get the weather information from weather API, which is defined here. This is an example response. As you can see, it is very precise with the weather that comes back. And we obviously don't want to feed everything into the AI or back into the AI, because it would just bloat the conversation. Now, to not bloat it, we literally take the information and validate it in a text format, obviously optimized with Markdown, so it is easier and better to interpret by the LLM for the next conversational messages. Now, to show you how I format it, first of all, I'm going to show you the data that comes back. You can see here in the data section, location and current. So location is obviously City of London. You can also see some latitude, longitude, etc. You can see the current weather, etc. And what happens then is we have a transform to JSON module, which literally just transforms a text into a JSON formatted text, meaning it just validates some parts of the text so that the JSON won't break. And this information is then fed into this JSON string right here. Now in the JSON module, you can see we have a simple text that says current weather, which is Markdown formatted, same here, condition, temperature, and latitude, longitude. Those are the fields we map from the response of the weather API. And if we get out the value or we check the value, this is how it looks like. Current weather, we have the condition. It says temperature is 17.1 degrees Celsius. We have lat long, and it is defined right here. So this information is then basically just sent back to Vapi in the result section with the tool call ID right here that is all predefined, including the result itself as a string. Now, for you to understand the exact definition of the tool and what you need to make, or what you need to adjust if you want to make the tool call itself, you can literally head over to the Vapi documentation right here. They have it under the tool calling stations in the advanced concept. And in here, you can see how to set up the payload, how you need to return the information, for example here with the result and the tool call ID. And all of this is basically taken care of by me inside of this make.com scenario, so you can check it out by yourself. Obviously, you need to get the webhook URL to receive the information in the first place. And the only thing that you actually basically need to send back information to the tool call is this part right here, which is a JSON that contains the results, tool call ID to reference which of the tool calls that came through you're currently handling, and the result, which is nothing else than whatever you would like to get back in the tool call. Now, I hope this makes the concept a little bit easier for you to understand. By the way, if you want to take it live, all you do is you click down here on the left on scheduling. Once that is scheduled, this tool will always be executed whenever you run a tool call through a conversation inside of your Vapi voice assistant. Now, that's it with a very, very basic setup. I hope this gives you a perspective on how to set up the basic tool call. And now we are coming to a little bit more of the advanced section, which is some extra goodies that I'm giving you along the way on how you can optimize those tool calls and just make them better, more effective, and how you can add some extra things called messages, which allow you to shorten the amount of time the user has to wait during a phone call for the answer, or to literally just give the caller a better experience on the phone with your AI. Now, to get started, what I'm going to do is I'll head back here to the tools calling section right here. And in the tool calling section, you have this example modification right here, which is literally just a JSON interpretation of the tool call that we have created inside of our Vapi assistant. Now, if you're part of my channel, you know that Vapi offers two types of assistants, which is a static assistant, which is what you directly create inside of your dashboard. So basically this ABA assistant right here, you edit it here, you manipulate it here, you publish it, and that's it. A transient-based assistant is the other option, which is nothing else than an assistant that is only created on demand whenever you make a phone call or whenever you receive a phone call. So it doesn't really exist in Vapi itself. It is generated in that moment the phone call happens. Now, I'm not gonna go deep into why this is the case, but it just allows for more flexibility, and you can generate it using JSON. That's our two things you need to know. You can check out some other videos on my channel. I have plenty of them there that explain them. I'll explain that concept more in details. And why I'm mentioning this is because tool calls can be set up in a very similar way. You can also create them transient based or obviously right within the dashboard here. And now to just give you an overview, it is very limited of what you can adjust inside of the visual interface of the tool calls. So obviously here we have the integration, we have a server URL that we can set, and we have the details that we can add down here, which is the tool name and the parameters down here. And we get the possibility of adding another value, which is this one, async tool boolean. So this async value stands for nothing else than asynchronously. And the only difference between a normal tool call and an async tool call is an async tool call doesn't return information back to your voice caller. So let's, for example, say you want to collect the user name. So if you create a tool that uses the async tool or the async setting right here, set to yes, it can basically send that information out, but it will not wait for an answer, which is great if you just want to track things. So let's say you create a function called get first name or send first name. Then you can set this to async, this async to true. And whenever the AI would ask inside of the conversation, what is your name? And the user answers with a name, the AI can literally just use this send first name function to send the name somewhere, but not wait for an answer. So it just shortens the amount of time the AI needs to answer on a message, and you can send that information to somewhere else to handle it in whatever way you need. In most cases, I expect you to not use async, so I would keep it off because most people want to have an answer. So if you have an answer, we use this webhook response to send the answer back. In case you would have the tool called async, you don't even need the answer right here. You should though. I would just always like to keep it because it's good to communicate information back and forth, also for results, for transcripts, etc. That is just something I'd like to mention. And now with that out of the way, these are the only settings we can set up. However, there are quite a lot more. And I'm going to show you and prove that to you by literally using that exact same tool ID right here within the API so that we can actually inspect what this tool call contains so that you see what other options you have to adjust things. Now I'm going to copy the ID for that of that getCurrentWeather function we created, and I'm going to head over to the Vapi documentation. Under API reference, you will find under tools an endpoint called getTool, which looks like this. Now, if you haven't been in the documentation, Vapi basically allows you with their setup right here to test the API directly inside of the documentation, which is awesome. All you would need to do is you would need to look at this part right here. You have the tool, you have the ID, which you can define in the path down here. So I click on path, I enter this tool call ID that I had from before, and you would obviously need to set the authorization, which would be your API key. Now, if you would like to get the API key, all you would do is you would head to your Vapi dashboard at the bottom left, click on your email, and then head to API keys. You create a private API key, and this is the API key you paste here in the authorization section. Once you have done that, you can click on send right here, and you will see the response of the tool call, which looks something like this. Now I'm just going to expand that, and what you can see now is the full tool response that comes back, which is as you can see here, the parameters, right? We have the name and the async description. So this is everything that we have defined right now inside of the tool call, which is not everything that is there, but I show you this because we're going to match information from the tool call that we currently created to the one to the actual fields that we have available. So heading back to the tools calling documentation right here, if we scroll down to the payload for your needs, we have a modification payload right here, or an example payload that contains something else, as you can see here. We have messages that doesn't exist inside of the tool that we basically created, right? It is not there. And if you scroll down, you see as well async and server URL. These are basically the URLs we're going to call and the async value that I just explained to you, including the function call itself. So what are those message fields? And if you haven't guessed it yet, they are usually kind of self-explanatory in my opinion, but I'm just going to guide you through them, because what they are is they're predefined messages that you can send through while the API or while the LLM is interacting with your tool call during a conversation. So you have request start, request complete, request failed, and request response delayed, meaning if something waits longer than a certain amount of time, you can say a specific message to the user to say, for example, yeah, I'm still waiting for something, whatever that looks like. So luckily, this example is also using the weather, which is also the reason why I chose the weather tool in the first place. But as you can see here, you can, for example, define a request start message with a content that says here, checking the weather forecast, please wait. Now, let's for example assume we're inside of a phone call with our voice assistant and we ask for the weather. As you heard earlier, it said hold on a sec, which is kind of the default value for the request start. And if you would like to change that to this, for example, checking the weather forecast, please wait. Inside of a transient-based assistant, you can do that very easily with creating the function or the tool call, or maybe even just updating it through the API inside of your Vapi dashboard, which work as well. Then, when we ask for London on the phone, like the weather for London, instead of saying hold a sec, it says checking the weather forecast, please wait. So what you basically do is you have the possibility of overriding some of the default answers or messages that Vapi says during a tool call to just shorten the amount of time the AI needs to answer while it is waiting and trying to retrieve information from somewhere else. And this is incredibly powerful because it makes the conversation more fluent. You can keep the user kind of entertained and active in the conversation, which again just higher the chance of the user not quitting the call based on whatever he does, right? And this one is another great one for the completed one and the failed one especially. So if something goes wrong, let's say weather API is down, we can just say a standard answer like, I couldn't get the weather information right now. Can you please try it again later? Something like that, right? And the user knows exactly why he doesn't get the answer for something. So this makes it incredibly powerful if you want to customize things during a tool call based on predefined answers if something happens or if something occurs in the first place, some type of event. Now the last one, I just want to quickly go over it because it has 3 parameters, which differs from the other ones. You have this response delayed, which means, let's for example say, the weather API, instead of answering immediately, it needs 20 seconds to load or 30 seconds to load. It needs quite some time to retrieve information. We can set here a timing in milliseconds, which is basically the amount of time we wait until a timeout during a function call to answer or to say this message. So let's say, for example, this is set to 2000, which means basically 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds. If there is no answer within 2 milliseconds back to Vapi or back to the user that is currently calling, we can say this standard message. It appears there's some delay in the communication with the weather API, which obviously would then tell the user, aha, okay, it seems to probably just take a little bit longer. Let me just wait on the phone. I probably still expect an answer. So you can just add some additional confirmation to the user that there's still something happening and the whole AI assistant didn't stop working, which a lot of people also have, and then they ask, hello, what's up there? And then it changes the output. It maybe even ignores the function call and or the tool call, and it does something else. This is the reason why we have them in there. So while there is no possibility of adding them directly inside of your dashboard under the tool calls, you can still use those messages directly inside of the Vapi tool calls in the documentation even. So if you say, for example, you go to update tool, and here in the body, you can literally just define the messages as you can see here by clicking on message. You say which kind of message you would like, request start, for example. You can add the information, and you can do this with multiple messages. Now here it by default just supports the request start. That is something that Vapi needs to change. But you can literally just create it with a single tool call, as you can see here. You basically copy that payload and you send it over in curl or wherever, or maybe with Postman to update that tool call based on the values that you added, based on the messages that you added inside of the JSON that you can also generate here. Now this is a really nice goodie, especially if you are very serious about creating voice agents, because those small adjustments, they make up for a couple of % of better results inside of your voice assistant, which again becomes super important if you have a large volume of inbound and outbound calls. Now I guess that's a lot of information for you to digest, and I'd like to just wrap it up to just give you like a brief overview again of the whole situation, how it looks with tool calls compared to the function calls before. So first of all, Vapi initially created function calls, which were deprecated, and now it's using tool calls. Tool calls are created separately inside of the Vapi dashboard in a separate view or component, which allows you to create those tool calls and reuse them in other assistants. So you can just plug them in. Tool calls also accept a request URL, and I would always suggest to not use the make.com Vapi integration, just because it gives you a little bit more flexibility of working with tool calls, especially if you want to be flexible later on of changing those things and changing those setups, maybe even using a custom setup on your very own account or very own server. And that's it for the technical part. Now lastly, tool calls are there to allow your AI to communicate with external platforms, with external services, let them talk to each other, exchange information to enrich your conversation that you're going to have with a voice AI agent. I hope that video was helpful for you. As mentioned, you're most welcome to download those templates completely for free, use them in your business, use them for your clients. You'll find them all located under hub.integratives.com inside of my resource hub. There are no limitations of usage, so just go ahead and do with it whatever you want. And with that out of the way, thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate your time, I appreciate you still being here. And if you would like to see something specific about Vapi, feel free to drop me a message below in the comments. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for watching and see you next time.